Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Mind of Sai Marie. Today, we are looking at the roots of resilience and the incredible range of a true literary master. My guest today is a Renaissance man whose work serves as a powerful lens for the human condition. William Bernhardt is the award winning author of over 60 books and the founder of WriterCon. Today, we're diving into his latest release, The Superman Wars. William, it's a pleasure to have you in the studio today. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So, you've seen the literary landscape change over decades. Why do you think the themes of legal and human stakes in your new book resonate so deeply in today's cultural climate?
Well, you're right. This is my 67th book, although most of the previous ones have been novels, many of them courtroom dramas. This is my first biography or nonfiction, but the themes in the Superman War are basically about the conflict between art and commerce, which is very much still present with us today. To me, that makes the story kind of timeless. I always say, I don't think it matters whether you're into comic books or not. This is about art and America. And it's a fascinating story. And I like to think that given my legal background, I'm the right one to tell it.
Sounds very interesting already. So, in your work, characters often have to pivot from standard procedures toward a hard earned personal strength. Based on your writing, what is the hardest thing for a person to reclaim once it's been lost in the legal system?
Well, that, of course, would be your IP, your intellectual property, or, rights, your character. This is what happened to Jerry Siegel, who is the subject of this book, The Superman Wars. He's the guy who came up with the idea for Superman, the world's first superhero, back in about 1934. And he was an 11th grader at the time, just a kid who'd lost his father. He didn't have any business experience or advisors, and that ended up costing him because you know where this is going, right? Superman, once published in 38, is a huge success all around the world and making all kinds of money for the comic book company, but not so much for Jerry, who unfortunately had lost the rights to the character and then spends the next decade regretting it until they finally fire him and rip his name off his own character, remove his creator credit from his creation, which is just, to my mind, immoral. It's wrong. We could argue about the legalities all day long, but that is just morally and ethically wrong.
I agree with you on that one. We talk a lot about reclaiming empowerment on this show. Through WriterCon, you empower thousands of writers. What can modern readers learn from the quiet resilience of a writer finding their voice for the first time?
Oh, so much. Let me just explain, backing up, that WriterCon is a bunch of programs I do actually, but the main one is an annual conference that I host every Labor Day weekend in Oklahoma City. We had over 300 people last year. It's a fine, fine conference, and we're doing it again this year. If you're interested, please go to the website, writercon.com. We're going to have more than 60 speakers. We've got authors, best-selling authors. We've got agents, a dozen of them, publishers, contests, whatever you're looking for at a conference, it's there. And this relates to your question. To me, learn everything you can, but the most valuable part of the conference to me is meeting people. We talk about networking or making connections, and that's never more important than here. To me, writers are the best people on the earth. Prejudiced, obviously, but I just think writers are almost uniformly warm and generous and the best people you can know. So, yeah, come to WriterCon to learn, but even more to the point, come to make connections, people who are going to be your support group or your street team or your beta readers, whatever you need. We all can benefit from finding our tribe, put it that way. And that's what WriterCon's about.
That
And
sounds
I've
like
seen
a
a
deal.
bunch of people come out of the conference and, more than 3 dozen published very well. So, and that's the wonderful moment you were talking about where you see somebody realize their dreams. Nothing better than
But yeah, that's a beautiful thing to see, and that sounds like it's an awesome experience for networking and making some friendships and, just getting yourself out there and seeing what
yeah.
opportunities lie ahead. But
Mhm.
the road to 60 books is long and humbling, I'm sure.
Well, I started in 1991, so I've been at it a while.
So, what was the biggest level up you had to experience to handle such heavy themes while keeping the story immersive and fast paced?
The hardest thing for me was just figuring out how I was going to write it because, as I indicated, this was a departure for me. And I was adamant that it was going to be nonfiction, and it is. I made up nothing. There are no scenes invented, there's no dialogue invented. If something's in quotation marks in my book, it came from either an eyewitness or a document, some contemporaneous record. But I also didn't want it to just be a boring recitation of events. And that's why I decided to use this narrative nonfiction approach. Same thing you might see from someone like, now I'm going to blank, of course, The Devil in the White City, Eric Larson, or Sebastian Younger, or you could take it all the way back to Truman Capote and In Cold Blood. But the idea is of using viewpoint and other techniques of fiction, but applying them to a nonfiction source. And it took me a while to get the hang of that too, but it turned out to be the perfect way to approach the subject. Because I didn't want it to just be, this happened, this happened. I wanted people to not just get what happened, but why. And to understand why it happened, you need to understand Jerry Siegel and who he was and what he went through for decades, standing up to power and fighting back for his rights.
So, the Superman wars deal with leadership under fire. When the situation gets dire, does the role of a hero change from a thinker to a doer?
Well, yeah, absolutely. That is, of course, the problem. And I might add, not just for Jerry Siegel, that most writers are thinkers and artists. They don't want to get into the grubby world of a business. And sometimes that hurts them. Jerry, of course, was very young. Like I said, he was still in school when he came up with this idea, ran across town and got his best friend Joe Schuster to do the art. But Jerry was the pusher, he was the one who was constantly, aggressively putting things out there. He had features before Superman too, but none that took off like this one. Obviously, he was basically their agent and put things out there. And unfortunately, when things start to go bad, when someone else takes over the comic book company, he's the one writing all the correspondence. And there's 10 years of really pretty abusive correspondence between the guy running the day-to-day operations of the comic book company and Jerry Siegel. It's just abusive. He's taking advantage of Jerry's youth and naivete, his desire to be friends and partners, the fact that his father has passed and he's really got no one to advise him. They very much play on that and do things that are legally dubious and in some cases flat out legally illegal. But that's all in the book.
So, if you could give one piece of advice to a society feeling the first cracks of injustice or institutional failure, what would that be?
That's pretty easy. Don't give your work away. Don't give up anything. Don't give up your rights unless you're getting something meaningful in return. That's a lesson Jerry learned the hard way, but is still totally with us. In addition to the writer conference, I do some small group works and retreats where I have a smaller group of people so I can actually read people's work and give them direct feedback and whatnot. And over again, I talk to people who are tempted to go with a vanity press or, they just want to see their book in print. I get that, but almost without exception. In fact, I can't think of an exception. They always regret it later. Don't give away your work unless you're getting something meaningful in return. One of the common myths regarding Superman and Jerry Siegel is that Jerry and Joe sold the rights to Superman for $130. That's not really true. The payment for the first story was $130 because they got $10 a page and it was a 13-page story. But the waiver they had to sign also included a clause that said you relinquish all rights to the characters, etc. What did they get for that? Nothing. They got nothing in addition. They literally gave away the rights to what's going to turn out to be $1 billion character and got nothing in return. And, they fought and they fought and they fought, but that's what the book is about. So that's my advice to everyone. Don't give up. I understand that you want to see it in print. I understand that it's night you have dreams about, somebody discovers your work and it goes big, but that's probably not going to happen unless you have either a responsible publisher or a responsible understanding of the self-publishing world. So don't give up your rights for nothing.
I absolutely agree with that. Make sure that you pay attention to the contracts that you're given and that the terms that are being offered align with what you foresee for yourself. And if you're not sure, you should always seek advice about that. So I
Yeah.
completely agree.
Well, things are going to happen, as you probably know. I don't know how long you've been doing this, but I've been doing it for a while. You remember when ebooks first broke out?
I do.
And nobody knew what to do. And I got a letter from my publisher saying, well, even though ebooks aren't actually mentioned in your early contracts because they didn't exist, we have taken the position that it's implicit in the other publishing licensing contract clauses. Well, obviously, I and everybody else disagreed, but it took about 2 years of fighting to get those ebook rights back. I'm trying to recover the audiobook rights to my early books now because back in the day, those were done on cassette tapes, analog. I show these to my kids and they're like, what's that? How do you play it? So there aren't even digital versions of these books, but can I get the rights back? No, of course not, because the print books are still in print. So those are lost rights that nobody's using effectively, but I'm still not going to get back. Don't give up your rights, people.
Yes, I totally agree, like I was saying. So, my final question, if your writings were a bridge between the law and the human heart, what is the one virtue you hope people take with them across the bridge?
I hope they remember that art is important, but it is not self generated unless you count AI stories, which so far at least are terrible. Even those aren't really self generated, are they? But my point is here's Superman, this billion-dollar character known all around the world, a global symbol of hope. The symbol of truth, justice, and the American way. But his creators got none of the above because it always seems to happen this way when there's a conflict between art and commerce. Commerce always wins. And so Jerry and Joe spend decades on the brink of poverty, never really share in the benefit of what they've created to any significant way. And that's just not the way it should be. If we want to continue to have art and artists, then we need to pay better attention and protect our artists.
I agree with that too. That is completely like it's relevant more than ever and with regard to IP and AI storytelling or whatever you might want to call it.
Yeah.
A lot of that was I mean, this is a thing that's happening now too, it's important to note, is a lot of people that were established authors had IP used to train a lot of these things,
Right. Well, that
and
lawsuit's pending, right?
yes, but for a lot of independent authors or different authors, they were loopholed out and there are a lot of people that still are not going to see any monetary compensation for what was taken from them and just basically have to kind of deal with the fact that this has happened. And then there's something that's happening in the reader community that's important to highlight is people saying, "Oh, well, this seems like AI," but now we're, a couple of years into these things existing after they had done that where you have to understand, of course it does, because they were trained off of content that these writers already wrote, so they learn stylistics and then they emulate it. That's the whole entire purpose. That's the reason why people went forward and the litigation began. But again, there are a lot of different independent authors and self-published authors whose content was also used in that data set and are not going to be able to get any kind of restitution for what occurred because of that loophole. So it's very tragic.
That's right. And we can't expect publishers to take care of us because that's not their job. We have to take care of one another. We, the artistic and the writing community, have to stand together. You probably have read about the book that Hachette just canceled. I won't say the title, but they canceled it because readers, people online, realized that it was written about 70% AI. I have to think that the publisher may have known that, especially since it had already been published in England, but it was selling. And they only yanked the book after the New York Times ran an article saying, hey, maybe this isn't the greatest thing to be publishing when there are human writers out there who write better. We can't expect anybody else to take care of us. We have to take care of ourselves.
Yes, this is true. This is true, and the fact of the matter is that technology and companies that stand to gain more revenue from doing things like this will do it every chance they get unless they are kept with those checks and balances, and
Right.
that is exactly why things like that happen, and it's a real shame to the big top 5 publishers when we know that there are people that have stacks and stacks, agents that have stacks and stacks of manuscripts that are just sitting there collecting dust that they're not even looking at, but they're accepting something that an AI made, and what does that actually say about the literary industry and where we stand now? That can't be accepted.
Yeah. Well, corporations exist for one purpose, and sadly, it is not to promote the arts, at least not first and foremost. It's to make money. You
Yes.
mentioned the big five, every one of them part of a large multinational corporation, except one, Simon and Schuster, which is owned now by some kind of equity fund or something like that. Point is, these are all money making operations. And in most cases, the book arm isn't even the biggest or even close to the biggest part of the corporation. If they don't make money, those guys are going to lose their jobs. So I don't fault anybody for focusing on publishing and profits. I'm just saying, artists, writers, this is going to be our job. We have to take care of each other. And that's another reason WriterCon exists. That's how we get the word out and inform people what's going on so that we can do a better job of having one another's backs.
Absolutely agree with that. Thank you for sharing your vision and your craft and your adventurous spirit with us today, William. It's been an incredible journey into the artist and the heart of storytelling.
Thanks for having me. It's been a blast.
To everyone listening, go get your hands on the Superman Wars and check out the WriterCon community. As William was saying, this is a powerful exploration of integrity and renewal. And remember, the mind is the most important story that we'll ever tell. Thank you for listening to the Mind of Sai Marie. Until next time, have a great week.